The silence in this room is the loudest sound I have ever heard. It's a heavy, textured silence, woven from the hum of the air conditioner, the distant, muffled sigh of traffic 10 stories below, and the unspoken words hanging between me and the woman in the white coat. She has a kind face, this doctor. She has lines around her eyes that suggest she has delivered good news and bad, and right now, her face is arranged into a mask of professional compassion that terrifies me more than outright pity ever could. She looks at the chart, then at me, then at the chart again, as if hoping the numbers might have rearranged themselves into a more hopeful story. Given your age, she says, her voice soft and deliberate, and these specific results, the FSH, the AMH, the antral follicle count. I have to be honest. The window for a viable pregnancy, using your own eggs, is very likely closed. The words don't hit me like a slap. They sink into me, slow and cold, like a stone dropping into deep, dark water. Closed. Such a final word. A word for shops, for libraries, for doors. Not for wombs. Not for futures. I feel a hollowing out, a visceral emptying, as if the ghost of the child I always imagined has finally, formally, been evicted from my body. My hands, resting on my knees, feel strangely detached. These are the hands that have held 1,000 client meetings, that have signed contracts worth millions, that have built empires of perception and desire for other women. And now, they feel useless. They will never cradle the curve of a newborn's head. They will never fasten the tiny, impossible buttons on a christening gown. They are just hands in a silent, white room. This is the cost. This is the final, itemized bill for a decade of ambition. I spent 10 years as a master architect, but I wasn't building with steel and glass. I was building with dreams. I was the ghost in the machine, the silent partner, the strategist who took the raw, brilliant, often chaotic passion of female entrepreneurs and gave it a spine. I gave it a voice, a face, a structure that could stand up in the brutal marketplace. I was a midwife to their ambitions, and I was so good at it. I helped them give birth to their life's work, their legacies. And all the while, I was quietly, systematically, dismantling my own. I spent 10 years building other women's dreams, and I lost my chance at motherhood along the way. This isn't a story of blame. It's a story of a price. A ledger of a life, tallied up in the one currency you can never earn back, never negotiate, never borrow, time. My profession found me, I think, as much as I found it. I was always the organizer, the planner. In college, while my friends were decorating their dorm rooms with posters of bands, I had a whiteboard. A color-coded schedule for classes, part-time work, and study groups. I loved the feeling of bringing order to chaos. My first job out of school was in a large, soulless marketing firm, a place of beige cubicles and men in identical blue shirts who talked about synergy and leveraging paradigms. I was miserable. I felt like a cog in a machine that was building nothing I cared about. I quit after 2 years, with a small savings account and a vast, terrifying sense of uncertainty. That's when I met Lena. It was at a grimy, vibrant weekend market, all handmade jewelry and scented soaps and the hopeful energy of people trying to make a living from their creativity. Lena had a small table tucked in a corner. She was hunched over a notebook, chewing on the end of her pen, surrounded by her candles. They weren't just candles. They were small, silent poems. The jars were simple, but the labels were handwritten, and the names. First frost on a window pane, old books and forgotten attics, salt and the sea breeze. I picked one up, bread baking on a rainy day, and uncorked the little wooden lid. The scent that wafted out wasn't just vanilla, it was warmth, it was safety, it was a memory of a childhood I'd never had. I looked at Lena. She had ink smudges on her fingers and a wild, desperate hope in her eyes. Her table was a beautiful mess. She had no system for taking payments, her display was haphazard, and she was clearly, utterly overwhelmed. I bought 5 candles. Then, driven by an impulse I didn't fully understand, I handed her my card. "I think I can help you," I said. "Your product is incredible. But your business, it needs a foundation. She looked at my card, then back at me, skepticism and hope warring on her face. A week later, we met at a coffee shop. I laid out a simple, one-page plan. A clean logo. A basic Shopify website. A strategy for approaching local boutiques. I did it for free, for the thrill of it. I saw the moment it clicked for her, the moment she realized her passion could be a viable, sustainable life. That moment was my drug. When her first big boutique order came in, she called me, sobbing. "You believed in me," she kept saying. "You saw it before I did." That was the seed. From that tiny, fragrant seed, my entire career grew. The high was undeniable. I was a creator, but my medium was potential. I could look at a woman and her raw, unformed idea and see the finished, polished entity it could become. Sophia was next. A ceramicist with the soul of a monk. Her studio was a sanctuary of clay and quiet concentration. Her mugs, bowls, and vases weren't symmetrical in a machine-made way, they had a wobble, a thumbprint, a soul. You felt you were holding a piece of a quiet moment when you held her work. But she was drowning in the business of art. Wholesale orders were a nightmare of logistics and self-doubt. I built her a brand story around the beauty of the imperfect, the art of the quiet hand. I helped her price her work so it reflected its true value, not just the cost of clay and kiln time. I found her a production assistant so she could focus on creating. Her first solo show sold out in 3 hours. I stood in the back of the gallery, watching people cradle her creations like holy objects, and I felt a surge of power so pure it was dizzying. I did this. I made this happen. My reputation became my identity. I was the dream weaver, the secret weapon. I was the person smart women went to when they were ready to turn their what if into a what's next. My calendar was no longer my own, it was a tapestry of other people's critical moments. Product launches were my birthdays. Funding rounds were my anniversaries. Magazine features were my holidays. Each success was a brick laid in the fortress of my own professional worth. I was building something unassailable, or so I thought. And through it all, there was Ben. My Ben. We met in a history class, of all places. I was fascinated by the rise and fall of empires, he was fascinated by the engineering that kept them standing, the aqueducts, the roads. That was us, in a nutshell. He was my steady ground. An engineer, a man who lived in a world of logic and predictable outcomes. If you applied the right force, you got the right result. My world was all psychology and perception, smoke and mirrors and storytelling. He was my anchor in the swirling, chaotic sea of my ambition. Our wedding was small, in a friend's backyard, strung with fairy lights and overflowing with laughter. I wore a simple silk dress, and he kept his hand on the small of my back all night, a steady, warm pressure that felt like home. That night, under a canopy of stars, we talked about the future. It wasn't a question of if, but when. A house with a big oak tree in the yard, he said. A dog, for sure. A messy one that sheds. And kids, I added, leaning into him. A little chaos. A lot of love. He kissed my forehead. 2 or 3, he whispered. It sounds perfect. The first delay was so logical it felt irresponsible not to delay. I was 29. My business was a fledgling bird, finally finding its wings. Ben was up for a major, career-defining project that required his full attention. Let's just get through this next year, we said to each other, our voices full of mutual support. Let's be financially rock solid. We want to give them everything, right? It was a narrative of responsibility, of love, even. We weren't saying no, we were saying not yet, with the best of intentions. Not yet is a seductive trap. It has no sharp edges. It doesn't feel like a sacrifice, it feels like a plan. But my body didn't understand not yet. I remember the first time the whisper of the biological clock became audible. I was 31. A close friend from college announced her pregnancy. I was genuinely, ecstatically happy for her. We went for coffee, and she glowed with a serene, powerful energy. She placed my hand on her barely there bump, and I felt a flutter, a tiny, alien movement. A life. A real, actual life was in there. A shiver went through me, a complex cocktail of joy and a sharp, aching envy that shamed me. Later that day, I was on a client call with a woman launching a sustainable children's clothing line. She was talking about organic cotton and non-toxic dyes, and all I could think about was that flutter under my hand. The ghost of a feeling. I ended the call, promising her a full marketing plan by the end of the week, and I went into the empty second bedroom of our apartment. The nursery to be. It was filled with a treadmill, a rack of my clothes, and boxes of old client archives. I stood in the doorway, and for the first time, the room didn't feel like a storage space. It felt like a promise I was breaking. I brought it up with Ben that night. Maybe we should start trying sooner rather than later, I said, my voice tentative. He looked up from his book, his expression gentle. Are you sure? You just landed the Chloe Nutrition account. That's going to be all-consuming for the next 6 months. Do you really want to be in your first trimester, sick and exhausted, trying to build a digital empire? He was being practical. He was being the engineer, looking at the variables. And he was right. The timing was terrible. So, we moved the goalpost. Again. I buried the ache under a mountain of work. I built Chloe a community, a movement. She fought the fad diet industry with science and compassion, and I gave her the megaphone. Her success was my solace. See? I was doing important work. The family could wait. The conflicts with Ben were never loud, dramatic fights. They were a slow, quiet corrosion. It was in the Saturday mornings he spent alone because I was at a photo shoot for a client's new product line. It was in the vacation we had to cut short because a client was having a brand crisis that turned out to be a disagreement over a font color. It was in the way he started making dinner for one, more and more often. I'd come home at 9 p.m., my mind buzzing with metrics and mock-ups, to find a plate of food covered in foil on the counter, and him already asleep. The distance between us grew, not in miles, but in shared experiences, in the small, daily intimacies that are the mortar of a marriage. The most painful silence was the one that replaced the conversation about children. We stopped saying when. We started saying if. The word was small, but its shadow was long. If we have kids, he'd say, while talking about future vacation plans. We'd need a bigger car, if we start a family. The conditional tense became the official language of our dreams. It was a language of retreat. Then, my father died. It was a massive, sudden heart attack. One day he was there, a quiet, solid man who grew tomatoes in his backyard and always asked if I was getting enough sleep. The next, he was just gone. The world lost its axis. The grief was a physical weight, a leaden suit I had to wear every day. In the stunned, hazy week after the funeral, I stayed with my mother. I wandered through their house, a museum of a life built together. The worn groove on the third step from the top, where his foot had landed for 40 years. The faded patch on the arm of his favorite chair. The clay handprint I made in kindergarten, his big, careful fingerprint still visible in the corner where he'd pressed it to help it set. I found my mother sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his empty chair. She wasn't weeping, she was just still. I sat with her, and she reached for my hand. Her hand was thin, veined, and strong. We built a good life, she said, her voice quiet but steady. It wasn't always easy. But we built it, piece by piece. And this, she gestured around the quiet, love-filled house, this is what's left. This is the legacy. Your father's legacy is you. It's the love in these walls. Her words shattered me. My legacy? What was my legacy? A dozen thriving businesses? A reputation for being the best in a niche, fleeting industry? I had built beautiful, temporary things. Sandcastles. My father had built a family. A structure that endured, that housed love even after he was gone. I felt a profound, seismic shift inside me. I had been chasing the wrong kind of immortality. I went home to Ben a different woman. I found him in the garage, tinkering with his bike. I didn't say hello. I just walked up to him, put my arms around his waist, and buried my face in his back. He stilled, then turned around, his hands coming up to hold my shoulders. "I'm done waiting," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I'm ready. Let's have a baby. Let's make a family. Right now." The relief that flooded his face was so profound it looked like pain. He pulled me into a tight, desperate embrace. "Okay," he breathed into my hair. "Okay. Let's do it." For a few months, it was all we were. We were a team with a single, beautiful mission. The air in our apartment changed, it was charged with hope and purpose. I scaled back my work. I said no to new clients. I bought prenatal vitamins and a book of baby names. I tracked my cycle with the same analytical precision I used for market trends. But this data felt different. This was the data of life, of creation. The first month, I was giddy with anticipation. The second, hopeful. The third, a flicker of anxiety. The fourth, fifth, sixth, the hope began to feel thin, stretched tight over a growing fear. This was supposed to be the easy part. We were young, healthy people. Why wasn't it happening? And then, the universe, in its cruel, ironic timing, presented me with the biggest professional opportunity of my life. Isabelle Dubois. The name alone carried weight. A culinary prodigy, the youngest woman to ever earn a Michelin star for her restaurant, Eclat. She was a force of nature, a genius with a vision to launch a line of artisan foods that would redefine the American palate. And she wanted me. Her call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was staring at a negative pregnancy test, trying to swallow my disappointment. "Hello," the voice was crisp, confident, with a melodic French accent. "This is Isabelle Dubois. I have been told by 3 separate people that you are the only person who can do what I need. They say you have a magic touch for women with big dreams. I have a very big dream. I am ready to build an empire. Are you ready to build it with me?" It was a siren's call. The old me, the ambitious, empire-building me, sat up straight. This was it. The pinnacle. Isabelle Dubois wasn't just a client, she was a landmark. Working with her would cement my own legend. My eyes flickered from the phone to the pregnancy test stick in my hand. I told myself a story. It was a story I was an expert at telling, a story of ultimate sacrifice for a greater good. This would be the last one. The big, final project. The one that would generate so much money, provide so much security, that I could step away from work completely when the baby came. I could be the fully present, unhurried, financially secure mother I dreamed of being. This wasn't a betrayal of my family dream, it was the ultimate, grand gesture for it. I was laying down the final, golden brick. I said yes. Telling Ben was one of the hardest things I have ever done. I laid out my case with the skill of a seasoned lawyer. I showed him the projections, the potential earnings. I painted a vivid picture of a future where he could maybe work less, where we could buy the house with the big oak tree outright, where our child would want for nothing. I sold him the dream of ultimate security. He listened, his face becoming more and more still with each word. When I finished, the silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. "So," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Let me get this straight. To build the perfect future for our hypothetical child, you need to postpone trying to have an actual child for another year, maybe 2. Ben, it's not postponing. We'll still be trying. It's just, concurrent." Concurrent, he repeated, the word a flat, dead thing. "You'll be building her empire and our family concurrently. Do you even hear yourself? This isn't a logistics problem. This is a life. He stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. I supported you through Lena, and Sophia, and Chloe. I ate dinner alone. I went to bed alone. I told myself it was for your dream, and I was happy to do it because it made you happy. But this is different. This is you choosing her dream over ours. This is you telling me, and telling that future child, that we are not enough. That we have to wait for something more. That is not true. I cried, tears springing to my eyes. This is for you. For us. Is it? He shouted, and the sound was so rare, so raw, it shocked us both into silence for a moment. Or is it for you? Is it because you're scared? Because a business plan is something you can control, you can perfect. A baby is messy. It's unpredictable. It's a force of nature. You can't architect a baby, my love. You just have to let it happen. And I think that terrifies you. His words were a direct hit. They exposed the fragile core of my carefully constructed narrative. We had a fight then that left scars. We said things we couldn't take back. I called him unsupportive and small-minded. He called me a coward, hiding behind a spreadsheet. We went to bed on opposite sides of a chasm we had dug together. The next morning, a fragile, wounded truce settled over the apartment. We didn't speak of it again. It became the great unspoken, a third presence in our home, cold and silent. Ben went to work. I took a deep breath, packed my ambition around my heart like a shield, and dove headfirst into the world of Isabelle Dubois. And I gave her everything. The fight with Ben, the gnawing anxiety of each passing month, the grief for my father, I channeled it all into the concrete, solvable problems of her empire. I became her shadow. We spent days in her test kitchen, tasting cheeses with names I couldn't pronounce, discussing the terroir of a specific patch of grass in the Alps that gave a particular milk its flavor. I traveled with her to dairy farms, to packaging conferences in Milan, to meetings with impossibly chic investors in Paris. I worked 16, 18-hour days. My phone was a constant stream of emails, texts, and updates from Isabelle. The label for the brie, the gold is not the right gold. It must be warmer. The copy for the website, it lacks, je ne sais quoi. It lacks soul. Find the soul. My life with Ben receded into a distant, blurry background. Our attempts to conceive became a sad, scheduled duty. It lost all its joy, all its spontaneity. It felt like a clinical procedure, another item on my overwhelming to-do list. The magic, the hope, the shared dream, it was gone, replaced by the sterile pressure of ovulation kits and basal body temperatures. The physical cost began to show. The constant travel and stress wreaked havoc on my body. My cycles, once regular as clockwork, became erratic. I was constantly tired, surviving on coffee and adrenaline. I told myself it was the price of greatness. I told myself it was for the future. The climax of the Isabelle Dubois project was her flagship store launch in Soho. It was a black tie event, a spectacle of New York glamour. The store was a masterpiece, a temple to gastronomy. It was all reclaimed barnwood and soft, golden light, smelling of hay, rich earth, and the profound, complex aroma of aging cheese. It was, by every professional metric, my greatest achievement. Isabelle was radiant, holding court like a queen. She moved through the crowd of critics, celebrities, and food world luminaries with effortless grace. And then she stepped onto a small, discreet podium to give a speech. She thanked her team, her family back in France, her investors. And then her eyes, sharp and brilliant, found mine across the room. And there is one person, she said, her voice ringing clear in the hushed space, to whom I owe a debt that can never be repaid. She is more than a consultant, more than a strategist. She is an architect of the soul. She took the dream that was in my heart, a fragile, trembling thing, and she built a magnificent house for it to live in. She has a rare and beautiful gift for building dreams for others. Thank you for building mine. The applause was thunderous. All these powerful, important people were clapping for me. For my work. I should have been floating. I should have felt the pinnacle of that addictive high. But as I stood there, a fixed, professional smile on my face, I felt nothing but a vast, howling emptiness. Her words echoed in my mind, twisting into the most devastating epitaph I could imagine. You have a gift for building dreams for others. Yes. I did. I had built Lena's dream, and Sophia's, and Chloe's, and now Isabel's magnificent, multi-million-dollar, Michelin-starred dream. I had built them beautiful, sturdy, successful dreams. And I had used the bricks and mortar of my own. I had used the time, the energy, the emotional capacity that should have been spent building a nursery, building a family, building a life with Ben. In that moment of supreme professional triumph, surrounded by the physical proof of my skill, I felt like the most profound failure on earth. I had built a palace for another woman's passion, and my own home was in ruins. I looked across the room and saw Ben. He had come, to support me, to be my husband. He was clapping too, a sad, proud, broken look on his face. And I knew. I knew with a certainty that felt like dying, that I had gotten the most important calculation of my life catastrophically wrong. Ambition had a price, and I had just paid it in full, with the one thing I could never get back. I made my way through the crowd, the laughter and clinking glasses sounding tinny and far away. I reached him. I need to leave, I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't say a word. He just took my hand, his grip firm and sure, and led me out of the beautiful temple I had built, onto the cold, anonymous New York sidewalk. We walked in silence for blocks, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on us. The next morning, I made the call. The one I'd been avoiding. The fertility specialist. It was time to stop pretending. It was time to face the music my own choices had composed. The process was a brutal education in biology and humility. It was a parade of invasive procedures, of cold ultrasound wands and vials of blood drawn from my arm. It was waiting rooms filled with other women, their faces etched with the same desperate hope I saw in the mirror. And it all led, inexorably, to that final, quiet conversation. The doctor, with her kind eyes, laid out the charts, the numbers, the cold, hard data. The high FSH. The almost non-existent AMH. The ultrasound showing quiet, empty ovaries. She used phrases like diminished ovarian reserve and poor ovarian response. She mentioned IVF, but her tone was not one of recommendation, but of obligation, a required mention for a door that was already 99% closed. At your age, and with these specific markers, the success rates are statistically very low. You could try, of course. But I need you to be prepared for the very high likelihood that it will not work. I walked out of that clinic hand in hand with Ben, but we were alone in our grief. The world had not ended. The sun was still shining. People were still rushing to work, buying coffee, living their lives. But the future we had imagined, the one we had talked about under the fairy lights, the one that had been the quiet, constant background hum of our love for over a decade, had vanished. It was a phantom limb, an ache for something that was no longer there. The grief that followed was a landscape I had to learn to navigate. It came in waves. Sometimes it was a dull, persistent ache, a background noise of loss. Other times, it was a tsunami that would knock me off my feet in the middle of a supermarket, triggered by the sight of a pregnant woman or the sound of a baby laughing. I had to withdraw from friends who were in the blissful chaos of new motherhood. Their joy was a language I could no longer speak, their complaints about sleepless nights feeling like a luxury I would have killed for. My relationship with my mother became strained under the weight of her uncomprehending sadness. You always wanted so much, darling, she'd say, shaking her head. I just wish you'd wanted this a little sooner. There was no malice in it, only the vast, unbridgeable gap between her generation's roadmap for a woman's life and the complex, contradictory terrain I had been navigating. Ben and I were left standing in the wreckage of our shared dream, two survivors of a shipwreck. We had to learn how to be in us without the North Star of parenthood to guide us. It was the hardest work of our lives. We went to counseling. We sat in a small, beige room and learned to talk about the loss, the resentment, the disappointment, without letting it destroy us. We had to grieve together, which meant we had to be vulnerable in ways we never had before. We had to fall in love again, not with the people we thought we were going to be, the vibrant, young parents, but with the people we had become, a woman marked by a profound loss and a man who had loved her through it. I didn't stop working. But the nature of my work changed, because I had changed. I stopped taking on the all-consuming, empire-building projects. The fire for that had been extinguished. I started consulting, mentoring. I would work with young women, bright-eyed and burning with ambition, and I would help them with their branding, their strategy, their 5-year plans. But I always ended our time together with the same piece of advice, the one earned with the currency of my deepest regret. I would look them in the eye, these brilliant, hungry women, and I would say, build your business. Build it strong and build it well. It will give you power and independence and a deep sense of pride. It is a worthy and wonderful thing to do. But never, ever, confuse it for your life. Your life is what happens in the spaces in between the deadlines. It's the quiet dinners with someone you love, the lazy Sunday mornings, the hand to hold in the dark when the world feels too heavy. It is the love you build, not the empire. And if you want a family, listen to that desire. Nurture it. Protect it. Do not let anyone, and I mean anyone, not a boss, not a client, not a society, and especially not your own ambitious, striving self, tell you that it can wait. Because time is a thief that doesn't ring the doorbell. It just slips in, and by the time you notice it's there, it's often too late. The resolution of my story is not a happy ending in the traditional sense. There is no miracle. There is no sudden, last-minute pregnancy, no deus ex machina adoption that erases the pain. The loss is a part of me now, a thread woven into the fabric of my being. Some days it's a soft, faded color. Other days, it's still brilliantly, painfully vivid. Ben and I are different people. Our marriage is different. It bears the scars of our shared loss, but those scars have also become a part of its strength, a testament to what we have survived. We have learned a fierce, grateful, daily appreciation for what we do have, each other. We travel to places we never would have with children. We adopted a scruffy, ridiculous, utterly joyful rescue dog who fills our quiet house with the sound of barking and the pitter-patter of paws. We love each other with a depth and a tenderness that was forged in the fires of our shared grief. I look back on those 10 years, on the women whose dreams I built. I am still proud of that work. Lena's candles still light up quiet evenings in homes across the country. Sophia's mugs still hold the morning coffee for thousands, a small moment of peace in a busy hand. Chloe's message of self-love continues to empower women. Isabel's cheese, well, it's still the most delicious thing I've ever tasted. I helped create something of beauty and value in the world. That matters. It does. But my legacy is not a portfolio of successful businesses. It is not a reputation in a niche industry. My legacy is the story I am telling you right now. It is a story of a woman who was so good at building houses for other people's dreams that she forgot to build a home for her own. It is a story of ambition and its terrifying, hidden price tags. It is a story of a love that was bent to its breaking point but, miraculously, did not snap. It is a cautionary tale, yes, but it is also a story of survival, of learning to find meaning and beauty in a life that looks nothing like the one you planned. So, if you take anything from my story, let it be this: build your castles. Chase your ambitions. Make your mark on the world. But for God's sake, build a home for your heart first. Tend to it. Protect it. Because ambition, for all its glitter and glory, comes at the highest personal price. And you must be very, very sure, down to the very marrow of your soul, that it is a price you are willing to pay. For me, the cost was a ghost. A beautiful, laughing, forever young ghost who will never call me mom. And that, I have learned, is a price that echoes for a lifetime.